to work together through the dip stitch rows of the Aftersome shawl. We'll work through each row together so that you have all the information you need to complete this portion of the shawl. We're going to assume that this green color yarn is the yarn that you've been using for section 1, and you're working up to the transition between section 1 and section 2. This is where you'll first encounter the dip stitch. You'll begin by working on the wrong side of your work, so it will look like stockinette. And to begin on my swatch, I'm going to just move through the first 2 stitches to get set up. Alright. So now I'm ready to work the first purl 1 wrapping yarn twice. So I'm going to put my needle through the next stitch as if to purl. I'm going to wrap the yarn around once and then a second time. I'll then pull the needle through the stitch, removing those 2 loops onto the right needle. I'm going to continue to purl 3. And then we're back to a purl 1 wrapping yarn twice, the same procedure. And then we'll continue like that across the row. Purl 3, purl 1 wrapping yarn twice, purl 3, purl 1 wrapping yarn twice. And then I'll repeat this for one last time on my swatch, wrapping yarn twice around that purl stitch. And I'll just finish off this row of my swatch, which will look different from the way you're working increases on your shawl. Okay. Row 2, we are going to join our yarn color 4 from the pattern. So I will just set up my stitches here at the beginning of my swatch, which will not necessarily be the same as what you're working in the pattern, but when we get to the dip stitch and that double purl stitch, you'll be working these the same. So I'm going to knit up until my double stitch. You'll see here it's looped around twice. We're going to slip that stitch purlwise, and you'll see it leaves an extra long stitch on the needle, and that's fine. You're going to knit your next stitch, and then in the following stitch we're going to work the dip stitch. So we're going to insert our needle 2 stitches below the stitch that's on your left hand needle. So we'll count 1, 2 stitches down, insert the right hand needle into that stitch, wrap your yarn and draw it through as if to knit, and then kind of leave like a lightly tensioned stitch on there. Then you're going to knit the following stitch and pull this longer loop over and off, and you'll see it leaves this kind of dipped stitch going down those 2 rows. You're going to knit the next stitch, and then we're back to another double wrapped stitch, which we will slip purlwise, and then we knit a stitch. We're back to a dip stitch. We're going to insert our needle 2 stitches below the stitch that's on your needle, so counting 1, 2, and inserting the needle into that second stitch. Wrap your yarn, draw and bring it through, leaving a looser loop. Knit the following stitch, pull the longer loop over and off your needle, pulling it over the stitch that was last worked. Now we knit, slip a double wrapped stitch, knit 1 stitch, time for another dip stitch, counting 2 stitches below, insert, draw through, leaving a longer loop, knit the following stitch, pull the dip stitch over and off. Knit, slip, knit, dip stitch, knit, slip, and I'm going to knit to the end of my swatch, and that completes row 2. For row 3, we're going to continue working with color 4. We'll be working on the wrong side. I'm just going to knit at the edge of my swatch here, and then I will return to purling on the back of my work. And when I reach one of these stitches that was the double wrapped purl, you'll see this was knit in our color number 1, we will slip that stitch purlwise with our yarn in the front of the work. And then we will continue purling 3 stitches, come to another double wrapped stitch, slip it purlwise with your yarn to the front of your work, purl 3, slip 1 purlwise with your yarn in the front of your work, slip 1, purl 3, slip 1, going to purl 2 and finish off the edge of my swatch. Okay, and now we're back to the right side of our work, and you can kind of see this dip stitch forming. You'll see the green, in this case, double wrapped purl stitches are becoming elongated as they're slipped across the rows, and the dip stitch has reached down into the prior rows. Now we are ready to work row 4. So in row 4 we continue with color 4, and we're just going to knit right across the row. This is what your work will look like after working row 4. And now we will move on to row 5. Okay, so just to set up the edge of my work here, I'm going to purl the first 2 stitches, and then I've come to the first purl 1 wrapping yarn twice. So a good hint and way to keep track of where you'll be working the purl 1 wrapping yarn twice, in most cases, is you'll see that prior color is pulled up. You'll see that prior color at the back of that purl stitch, and that's kind of a hint that that's where you're going to work a wrapping yarn twice. The only place where this won't be true is at the edge of the shawl, where you have some increases and you may be adding stitches that need to be wrapped twice. But for the main part of the body of the shawl, you can count on working those above where you worked them past. So we're going to do the same thing, purl 1 wrapping yarn twice, purl 3, purl 1 wrapping yarn twice, purl 3, and so forth across your row. And there you have it. That is the dip stitch. And that should walk you through all of the unique stitches that you'll find in the Aftersome shawl. I hope you enjoy working the pattern. Happy knitting!